Judge Richard Calloway prided himself on his keen ability to read people. With over 20 years on the bench, he thought he had seen it all. So when 19-year-old Tiana Brooks stood before him, dressed in casual jeans and a hoodie, he smirked. "Another troublemaker," he muttered under his breath. Tiana had been accused of trespassing in a wealthy neighborhood, despite simply jogging through the area. The arresting officer claimed she was acting suspiciously. The courtroom was filled with murmurs as Judge Calloway leaned forward. "What do we have here?" he mused sarcastically. "A young woman who thinks the law doesn't apply to her." Tiana stood tall, her dark eyes gleaming with intelligence. "Your Honor, I'd like to represent myself," she said confidently. The courtroom burst into laughter. The judge chuckled along with them. "Oh, this should be interesting." Calloway glanced at the prosecutor, a seasoned attorney named Mark Ellison. "Are we allowing law students to practice now?" he said, shaking his head. "I'm not a law student, Your Honor," Tiana responded smoothly. "I'm a licensed attorney." Silence fell over the courtroom. The judge's smirk faded. He narrowed his eyes. "You expect me to believe that?" Tiana reached into her pocket and pulled out a bar association card. She walked forward and handed it to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. Calloway examined it, his face slowly draining of color. Mark Ellison cleared his throat. "Your Honor, I can confirm. Miss Brooks passed the bar at 16. The courtroom gasped. A reporter in the gallery scrambled to take notes. The courtroom gasped. A reporter in the gallery scrambled to take notes. The judge stiffened, struggling to regain control of the moment. That doesn't change the fact that she was trespassing." Tiana clasped her hands together. "Respectfully, Your Honor, I'd like to move for an immediate dismissal of these charges. The police report states I was on a public sidewalk when I was stopped. That is not trespassing." The judge hesitated. He looked over at Ellison, who sighed. "She's right." Calloway's face burned. He had mocked her, dismissed her, and now she was tearing apart the case with ease. "Fine," he muttered. "Case dismissed." Tiana nodded, collected her things, and walked out of the courtroom, leaving behind a stunned audience and a judge who had just learned a valuable lesson. As Tiana exited the courtroom, reporters swarmed her, cameras flashing and microphones thrust forward. "Miss Brooks. How does it feel to outsmart a judge?" one journalist asked. She smiled politely. It was never about outsmarting anyone. It was about justice. Her words echoed across social media within hours. Clips of the courtroom exchange went viral. People praised her composure and intelligence, but there were also critics, those who refused to believe a young black woman could achieve such a feat. Meanwhile, Judge Calloway sat in his chambers, still stunned. He prided himself on fairness, but today, he had allowed bias to cloud his judgment. He replayed the scene in his head, his own mocking words coming back to haunt him. Later that evening, Tiana received a call from a familiar voice. "Tiana, it's Professor Langston." Her old law professor had always been her biggest supporter. "I saw what happened in court today," he said. "The world is watching you now. Are you ready for that kind of attention?" She exhaled. "I didn't ask for it, but if it helps shine a light on injustice, then I'll use it." Over the next few days, invitations flooded in, interviews, speaking engagements, even a book deal offer. But Tiana wasn't interested in fame. She had work to do. Then came the unexpected message. Judge Calloway wanted to meet. Curious, she agreed. They met in a quiet cafe, away from the public eye. He looked different, less arrogant, more reflective. "I owe you an apology," he admitted. "I judged you before you even spoke. That was wrong." Tiana studied him carefully. "Apology accepted. But it's not just about me, Judge. How many others have you dismissed unfairly?" He nodded slowly. I've been asking myself that same question. Their conversation stretched into hours, shifting from personal experiences to systemic flaws in the legal system. By the end, Calloway made a promise: he would do better. As Tiana walked away, she realized something powerful. Change didn't always come from winning cases. Sometimes, it came from changing minds. In the days that followed, Tiana's story continued to spread. News outlets debated the significance of what had happened in that courtroom. Some called it a triumph of justice, others dismissed it as a rare anomaly. But for Tiana, it was just the beginning. One evening, she sat in her small but cluttered office, reviewing new cases. Her pro bono legal firm, which she had started fresh out of law school, had seen a surge in requests. Young black men and women, wrongfully accused or unfairly treated, sought her out. The legal world had tried to overlook her, but now they couldn't ignore her impact. A knock on her door startled her. She looked up to see a young man, no older than 17, standing nervously in the doorway. "Miss Brooks?" he asked hesitantly. She smiled. "Call me Tiana. Come in." The boy, Jamal, fidgeted as he sat across from her. "I need help," he admitted. "I got arrested for something I didn't do." Tiana leaned forward, listening intently as he described being accused of shoplifting despite a lack of evidence. The store owner had assumed he was guilty just because of how he looked. She took a deep breath. "We're going to fight this." That night, Tiana stayed late, preparing his defense. She had been in his position before, misjudged, underestimated. But now, she had the power to change the outcome. The next morning, she walked into the courthouse with Jamal by her side. To her surprise, Judge Calloway was presiding over the case. Their eyes met, and for a brief moment, she saw something different in his gaze. Respect. As the proceedings began, she stood tall, her voice unwavering as she tore apart the weak case against Jamal. The store's surveillance footage had conveniently been misplaced, but Tiana exposed inconsistencies in the store owner's testimony. Judge Calloway listened carefully. This time, there were no smirks, no dismissive comments. After a brief deliberation, he made his ruling. "Case dismissed," he announced. Jamal exhaled in relief, turning to Tiana with wide eyes. "You did it," he whispered. She placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "No. We did it." As they walked out of the courthouse, a small group of reporters gathered, eager for a follow-up to Tiana's now famous moment. One of them called out, "Miss Brooks, do you feel like you're making a difference?" She smiled, thinking about Jamal, about Judge Calloway, about every person who had ever been written off before being given a chance. "I'm just getting started." The weeks that followed cemented Tiana Brooks as more than just a viral sensation. She was a force to be reckoned with in the legal world. Calls flooded in from people across the country who had faced racial profiling, unfair sentencing, and wrongful accusations. She worked tirelessly, taking on as many cases as she could, often for little to no payment. One afternoon, as she sat in her office buried under case files, her phone rang. She almost ignored it, but something made her pick up. "Miss Brooks?" The voice on the other end was unfamiliar, deep and measured. "Yes, this is Tiana. My name is Daniel Carter. I run the Civil Rights Legal Initiative in D.C. I've been following your work." Tiana straightened. She had heard of Carter. He was a heavyweight in the legal world, known for taking on major cases of injustice. "I'd love to meet with you," he continued. "We have an opening for a lead attorney, and I think you'd be perfect for it." Tiana's heart pounded. This was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, but she hesitated. She had built something important here, her community needed her. "Thank you," she said carefully. "But I have responsibilities to the people here." Carter chuckled. "And that's exactly why I'm offering. You're making waves in one city, but what if you could do it nationwide? We could give you the resources to take on bigger cases, set legal precedents, and help even more people. The weight of his words settled over her. She had spent her life fighting uphill battles, scraping together resources, pushing back against a system designed to crush people like her. But with the right backing, she could do so much more. "I'll think about it," she promised. That night, she found herself back in court, not as a lawyer, but as an observer. Judge Calloway was presiding over a different case, and she watched him carefully. To her surprise, he was different. He listened more, asked fairer questions. She caught his eye as he recessed for a break. He approached her cautiously. "You're watching me," he noted with a hint of amusement. "I'm making sure you're keeping your promise," she said. He sighed. "I won't pretend I changed overnight, but I'm trying. You forced me to confront things I never thought about." She studied him for a moment before nodding. "Good. Keep doing that." The conversation stayed with her long after she left the courthouse. If one judge could change, maybe others could too. Maybe the entire system could be forced to evolve. She pulled out Carter's business card and ran her fingers over it. The next morning, she made her decision. She called Carter back. "I'm in," she said. And just like that, Tiana Brooks' fight for justice expanded beyond one courtroom, one city. She was no longer just a young attorney proving people wrong, she was a movement. Tiana packed her things, leaving behind the small office that had been the foundation of her journey. It wasn't easy walking away from the place where she had fought some of her hardest battles, but she knew this was the right move. Before she left, she made sure her firm wouldn't dissolve. She handed the reins to her close friend and fellow attorney, Jada Owens, ensuring that their community would still have someone fighting for them. "Are you sure about this?" Jada asked as they stood in the nearly empty office. Tiana nodded. "I am. But this isn't goodbye. I'll still be watching, still helping. Just on a bigger scale." Jada smirked. "I always knew you were meant for more than this little office." Tiana hugged her, then walked out the door, feeling the weight of her next chapter settling on her shoulders. When she arrived in Washington, D.C., she was immediately thrown into the deep end. The Civil Rights Legal Initiative was bigger than anything she had ever been part of: lawyers, activists, and researchers working around the clock to take down injustices on a national level. Her first case under the initiative was one that would test her skills like never before. A young black man named Andre Williams had been sentenced to 30 years for a crime he didn't commit. The conviction had been based on unreliable witness testimony, and the judge who sentenced him had a history of disproportionately harsh rulings against black defendants. Tiana dove in headfirst, spending sleepless nights poring over case files, looking for cracks in the prosecution's arguments. She worked alongside Daniel Carter, whose experience and connections opened doors she never could have accessed alone. The case gained national attention. Protesters gathered outside the courthouse, demanding justice for Andre. News anchors debated the flaws in the legal system. On the day of the retrial, Tiana stood before a packed courtroom, her voice steady and commanding. "The evidence used to convict my client was flimsy at best, prejudiced at worst," she declared. "We are here today to correct an injustice that never should have happened." Judge Marion Graves, known for her strict demeanor, eyed her carefully. "Miss Brooks, I trust you have more than just strong words to back your claims." Tiana nodded, unfazed. "Absolutely, Your Honor." Over the next 3 hours, she dismantled the case against Andre. She exposed the inconsistencies in witness statements, presented new forensic evidence, and highlighted the judge's biased history. When she finished, the courtroom was silent. The judge took a long pause before speaking. "In light of the evidence presented, this court overturns the conviction of Andre Williams." A collective gasp filled the room, followed by cheers from the crowd outside. Andre's mother sobbed into her hands as her son was finally freed. Tiana exhaled, the weight of the victory settling over her. But she knew this wasn't the end. There were countless other Andres out there, waiting for justice. That night, she sat in her new office, staring at the city lights. Daniel Carter walked in, a knowing smile on his face. "You did good today." She nodded. "It's not enough." He chuckled. "It never is. That's why we keep fighting." Tiana turned to face him, her eyes burning with determination. "Then let's go find the next battle." A week after Andre Williams' exoneration, Tiana Brooks found herself at the center of a national debate. News outlets praised her as the rising star of civil rights law, while others accused her of being too radical. Social media buzzed with discussions about her, and powerful figures in the legal world had taken notice. She didn't care about the attention. All she cared about was the work. Her inbox was flooded with requests, families pleading for help, attorneys asking for her expertise, journalists wanting statements. She barely had time to eat or sleep, but she didn't slow down. She couldn't. Then came the threat. It arrived as an anonymous letter, slid under her office door late one night. "Stop digging where you don't belong. Some cases aren't meant to be won." Tiana read the note twice, her stomach twisting. She knew what this meant. She was stepping on the wrong toes, challenging the wrong people. Instead of fear, she felt resolve harden inside her. She showed the letter to Daniel Carter the next morning. He frowned, turning the paper over in his hands. "You've made enemies," he said grimly. "Good," she replied. "That means I'm doing something right." He sighed. "Tiana, threats like this don't come from nobodies. Whoever sent this has power." She met his gaze steadily. "So do we." The next case that landed on her desk was even bigger than Andre Williams. A group of Black and Latino teenagers in Louisiana had been given maximum sentences for minor drug offenses, cases riddled with misconduct, missing evidence, and coerced confessions. The judge who had sentenced them had deep political ties. Tiana knew she was walking into a fight bigger than anything she had faced before. She traveled to Louisiana, meeting with the families of the incarcerated teens. She listened to their stories, mothers who had spent their life savings on appeals, fathers who had lost hope. One mother, Mrs. Ramirez, grabbed Tiana's hands, tears in her eyes. "Please," she whispered. "Don't let them take my son's life." Tiana swallowed the lump in her throat. "I won't." But as she dug deeper, she realized just how dangerous this case was. The judge, Leonard Hawthorne, had been quietly burying cases like this for years. He had ties to private prisons that profited off of longer sentences. He wasn't just handing down harsh punishments, he was making money off them. She had uncovered something much bigger than a single wrongful conviction. She had found a system built on corruption. One night, while reviewing files in her hotel room, her phone buzzed with an unknown number. "Back off," a voice said. "Or you'll regret it." Click. Tiana sat there, gripping her phone. The air felt heavy. For the first time, she hesitated. This wasn't just about courtrooms anymore. This was about power, money, control. People like Judge Hawthorne didn't just lose. They destroyed anyone who tried to take them down. But then she thought of Andre Williams. Of Jamal. Of every person who had been crushed under the weight of an unjust system. She picked up her phone and called Daniel Carter. "We're going after him," she said. There was silence on the other end. Then, a low chuckle. "I hoped you'd say that." Tiana knew this case would be different. It wasn't just about proving innocence, it was about dismantling a system of corruption that had thrived in the shadows for years. She and Daniel assembled a team of legal experts, investigators, and journalists. They gathered evidence, subpoenaed records, and interviewed former court clerks and prison officials. What they found was damning. Judge Leonard Hawthorne had sentenced hundreds of young Black and Latino men to excessive prison terms, often based on flimsy evidence. In return, he received kickbacks from private prisons that profited from their incarceration. He had built an empire on stolen futures. But exposing him wouldn't be easy. Late one night, as Tiana sat in her office reviewing documents, the power suddenly went out. Her computer screen went black. She reached for her phone, but there was no signal. A noise outside made her heart race. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate. She grabbed the heavy case file on her desk, ready to defend herself if necessary. A shadow passed her window. Then, just as suddenly as it had gone dark, the power came back on. Her phone buzzed with a message from Daniel, "They know we're onto them. Be careful." Tiana exhaled shakily. They were getting too close. The next morning, she filed a motion to reopen the cases of the young men Hawthorne had sentenced. But she didn't stop there, she went public. Standing on the courthouse steps, surrounded by reporters, she laid out the evidence of corruption. For years, Judge Hawthorne has used his courtroom as a tool for profit, destroying the lives of young men who deserve justice. Her words spread like wildfire. Social media exploded. Protesters gathered outside the courthouse. The pressure was mounting. Then, a breaking news alert. Judge Leonard Hawthorne under federal investigation for corruption and racketeering. Tiana let out a slow breath. They had done it. A week later, as she sat in her office preparing for the upcoming trials, she received an unexpected visitor. Judge Richard Calloway. He looked different, less arrogant, more thoughtful. "I saw what you did," he said. "It takes guts to go after someone like Hawthorne." Tiana studied him carefully. "And?" He sighed. "And I want to help. I know judges, good ones, who are tired of this system being used for greed. You have people willing to fight with you." Tiana leaned back in her chair. She had started this journey alone, fighting case by case. But now, she had allies. A movement. She extended her hand. "Then let's change the system together." Calloway shook it. "Let's do it." As he left, Tiana looked out her window at the city below. She had come so far, but the fight was just beginning. And she was ready. The days that followed were a whirlwind. The federal investigation into Judge Hawthorne gained momentum, and more victims of his corrupt rulings came forward. With every news cycle, the pressure on the system increased. Tiana barely slept. She spent her days in court, filing motions, meeting with lawmakers, and working with investigative journalists to uncover more layers of the conspiracy. The corruption didn't end with Hawthorne. There were prosecutors, police officers, and private prison executives with blood on their hands. One evening, as she was reviewing case files in her office, her phone rang. It was an unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. A deep voice spoke. "You don't know who you're messing with." Click. Tiana stared at the phone, her heart pounding. The threats were getting worse. That night, Daniel Carter insisted on hiring security for her. "You're too important to this case," he told her. "We can't afford to lose you." She didn't argue. She had come too far to be silenced now. Then, something unexpected happened. Judge Hawthorne resigned. It was a desperate move, an attempt to avoid a trial, but it wasn't enough. Days later, he was arrested on federal corruption charges. Tiana was in court when the news broke. Reporters swarmed her as she walked outside. "How does it feel to take down one of the most powerful judges in the country?" a journalist asked. Tiana took a deep breath. This was never about one judge. It's about a system that allows corruption to thrive. And we're not stopping here. The movement she had started was bigger than she ever imagined. Young lawyers reached out, inspired by her work. Activists and community leaders joined the fight. Even former opponents, like Judge Calloway, stepped forward, ready to help. Weeks later, as she prepared for another trial, she received a letter. This one wasn't a threat. It was from Andre Williams. "Miss Brooks, because of you, I have my life back. I'm going to law school. One day, I hope to fight for justice just like you. Thank you for believing in me." Tiana smiled, wiping away a tear. She had fought to change the system. Now, she was inspiring the next generation to do the same. And she was just getting started.